So, Angela, it is a delight to be in your office in Normanshaw North, which is next to Portcullis House. It's also slightly weird for me because this office...
Welcome home.
Exactly. So I used to spend a lot of time in this office.
Have I done all right with it since you've left?
It's like Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen has come in and waved the magic wand. The office is looking amazing. It's got a very different feel to it.
Well, the maiden name was Bowen, but obviously I'm not related to Lawrence, but yeah, maybe it just rubbed off on me.
And so you've decorated this room yourself.
I did, yeah. I wanted it to look less corporate.
Yeah.
And more chill out. And I've got like my little sensory cushions around and things like that so that when people come in, they can sit down and just chew the fat and feel safe. There's not many safe places in politics.
There's not. It's a bit of a safe space. And you've got this amazing sensory cushion, which has got a unicorn on it. So do you offer like a sort of, like a kind of a sort of support service where people can come down and hug the unicorn and talk to you?
So people often do. They don't even know they're doing it. So it's often on my sofa and people will come and sit down and then I'll notice they're talking to me and within 20 minutes they're stroking the cushion and they don't even know they're doing it. So I think it helps people.
And just to paint the picture as well, I'm sat next to a
karaoke
a bust of Keir Hardie with an inflatable microphone next to him.
From Soho.
So what is Keir's favourite karaoke number?
You to Me Are Everything by The Real Thing. He's a bit old school. He's traditionalist.
Has the actual Keir Starmer come in to do karaoke with you?
We haven't done karaoke yet, but, you know, we met in lockdown, as they say. Our relationship was blossoming during lockdown. We haven't had any work events or anything of that nature. So we've only just started to get out and about again. So maybe he'll invite me very soon. I think I'll drag him out. It's my birthday in a few weeks, so maybe I can drag him out for that.
Okay, that is something. That is... Okay, I'm coming for that, right?
I'm giving him notice now.
You're giving
already,
him noticing.
That's what I'm expecting, a karaoke sesh.
So, Angela Rayner, we're looking ahead to International Women's Day. What does International Women's Day mean to you, and what does feminism mean to you?
I mean, when I was younger, I didn't really see the significance of it, or I saw what was happening internationally, because if you look at what's happening for women's rights in other countries, actually women are still dying for their rights that we just take for granted here in the UK. And it was very much, I saw it as an international issue and didn't really get the women's movement here in the UK when I was younger. Whereas as I've got a lot older, I've recognised the inequalities, the misogyny, the unconscious bias that remains. So to me, feminism is about recognising that sometimes we condition ourselves to act in a certain way, which is counterproductive, not only for ourselves, but for women generally. So it's about recognising our deficiencies, and we've all got them. And women are just as bad as anyone else at this, as not acting out their feminism, in my view. So it's about being true to yourself, recognising that you can perpetuate and reinforce these inequalities, and to do everything actively you can to prevent that from happening, and to highlighting and being, I call it being a sister, is when you look out for each other and you respond in a way that is sisterly and in a way that says, actually, I can support you, and that doesn't mean it's a threat to me or anybody else's existence to do that.
And there is an argument that feminism is a bit white middle class. Do you think there's some truth in that?
I think there's different brands or different shades of feminism, and people wear their feminism in the way that it works for them. And sometimes the language and the tone of feminism puts people off. And thinks, because most people think, well, I'm not interested in all of that. I just get on with my day-to-day life. But, my friends who are, holding down 2 jobs, got 7 kids, looking after the grandkids and everything else, they're just as much of a feminist as I am, but they would not recognise it in that way. So I think that, certain language that's used around feminism can be off-putting. But actually, I think that, that feminism is what it means to you as an individual. So it's about supporting, understanding and celebrating who you are as a woman. So if you like pink things, great. It doesn't mean you're not a feminist because you like to wear pink.
Listen, my memories from the pink bus are all flooding back to me.
And this is the thing, it shouldn't exclude people because of their brand of feminism or how they wear their womanhood is different. It shouldn't exclude them. Actually, it should be inclusive. So I think that's one of the things I try and do with my feminism is make it real to me and accept other people's brand of that and say, well, how do we support each other, rather than how do I say, oh, well, you're not part of the feminist movement because you're not doing this on this particular issue. Actually, it's about, well, you know, we're all women, and how do we celebrate being a woman, and how do you wear that yourself and celebrate being unique as an individual?
And Angela, where do you think we are in terms of women's advances? Because many people do feel that we're going backwards, particularly after the pandemic. And when you look at sort of power in this country, and of course, it's a year since Sarah Everard was killed and murdered. And there's a big discussion about violence against women. Where do you think we are?
Sure. And I think, you know, the Sarah Everard case and the situation that we see when, you know, we've been discussing in Parliament recently about violence against women and girls. And this is a real issue that women are facing. And it does feel quite scary. And sometimes you think, well, are we going backwards on some of these issues? But I try and look at it in a more longer term. So if you look at the last 100 years, then if you see where women have got, I mean, even if you look at where my grandma was and her generation compared to where I am. So I use this example all the time, and it's a crude example, but I think it's an important one that impacted on my life and changed my life for the better. Was my grandma, if she'd have had a child at 16 like I did, she wouldn't have been able to keep that child. There'd have been immense pressure for her to give up her child. And we see it on these programmes like Land Lost Family, where these single women had to give up their children.
Yeah.
And yet within that generation, I've now had a child at 16. And thankfully, society had moved on that much, and the state had moved on to support me, thankfully. And I was able to be an incredibly successful mum and a grandmum now as well, and have my son in my life. So I didn't miss out in the way that my grandma's generation did. So to me, women have made progress, and we are making progress. There is more for us to do, of course there is. But I like to think of the positives that we've all managed to achieve together as women. And I think during the day-to-day struggle, sometimes you can forget that. So you have to look at a more broader, more longer outlook of where we were and where we are now. Of course, there's so much more for us to do, and we must never forget that. But I do think we have advanced and made progress.
So do you think it's important to not just be a counsel of despair, but to celebrate the advances that have been made?
Absolutely, I think so. And I think it's a thing for our movement as well, because in our movement, we always think of the negatives. It's just a thing. It's a working class. What is it we say? You're not happy unless you're moaning about something. It's kind of a thing that we do. And it's a thing that we do in our movement as well. And you should recognise that we've got a lot of problems and a lot of things that need to be resolved, and some of the intersectionality and some of, you know, the way in which discrimination can take on many forms. I do think we have to recognise that, but I do think it's important to recognise what the people of the past, you know, the Dagenham women, what we've managed to achieve throughout our history, and as in particular our Labour history, what we've achieved, the equalities legislation, everything that we've done, the working tax credits that help girls like me get into jobs when we'd had our children, that we made great advancements. So I like to think of the positives as well as, obviously, you know, especially at times where there's so much negative going around as well.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of negative, just doing what we do best, looking at the sort of negative. I mean, there is much to celebrate, but the women's movement does feel quite fractured at the moment. It does feel like, you know, the women's movement is kind of at war with itself. This is with the wider women's movement, and certainly on the left and within the Labour Party. And there are these big clashes. We see a lot of it on social media over the issues of biological sex, gender identity, transgender rights. See, Rosie Duffield has had like quite a hard time. You know, she said that she might even think about leaving the Labour Party. What do you think, as deputy leader and a proud feminist and somebody who wants to be very inclusive, what can be done to try and bring some peace to this? Is there a way through?
Well, I think we should not conduct those debates on social media is my number one. I would urge anyone not to do that. One of the things that I find really upsetting about, especially some of the debates around trans rights and around women's rights, is that teenagers, when they're we've all been teenagers, we know how challenging that is for you. Can you imagine reading some of the comments that are made by people? You know, I'm an MP, so they see me as an important person. You know, I'm a person of influence. If I'm trying to get something across in a Twitter tweet of something as so important as maybe the Gender Recognition Act or important about women's rights, sometimes the way in which they come across and how it's conducted, I fear for that 15-year-old who reads that and is looking for, not for validation, they're looking for validation of their negative feelings of themselves, where they're trying to come to terms with how do I fit in with the world? How do I feel about it? So I feel a real sense of our movement should not conduct itself in that way, and especially not on social media, because it's not the right way to go about these things. And I really worry about that, and I worry about the way in which social media can pile on to people. So I can totally appreciate how Rosie Duffield feels, because I get piles on me when I'm on social media. So I can understand how, you feel like all of a sudden you're under siege and under attack for a comment. And I've witnessed that in social media forums. So I think that social media, first of all, is my number one ban on all these issues that are complex issues where people feel triggered by their own experiences and their expertise in that area. It's not a place to conduct those debates, and we should be respectful of where people are coming from in the debate, and we should be respectful of how people are feeling. And I believe there's a way forward in our movement, just like there was in Section 28. There's a way forward for our movement to challenge itself and say, are my values, am I exposing my values by the way in which I'm conducting myself in the debate? And am I listening to what other people are saying? Am I actually hearing them and where they're coming from? And then how do we bring people together? You're
basically saying, look, we've got to have a calm debate about this.
Absolutely.
Not online, but where should those debates be happening, particularly within the Labour Party? Have you spoken to Rosie Duffield yourself about this?
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with Rosie, and she's contacted me, especially in light of some of the abuse that we all face as women members of Parliament as well. But I think it has to be conducted within our policy forum. That's an important place where we actually come together, where we can ask experts to come in and to speak to us on particular subjects as well, and get their information through our stakeholder engagement, so that we're listening to all sides of the debate and truly understanding where people are and the practicalities around that. I think there's a pragmatic way through. I absolutely believe it. I don't think women are trying to, go against trans women's rights. And, the women's movement is not going against the trans women's movement. And I don't think the trans women's movement are trying to attack the women's rights and women's movement. Actually, the two are the same, and we can combine them. It's just that sometimes when voices are on the extreme of both arguments, do not listen or understand the other side, it becomes a very heated debate.
I mean,
and I think it's damaging. It's damaging for everybody, because obviously you can see the emotion. And like I say, the one thing that always sticks in my mind is, if that's my 15-year-old that's reading those comments, that's what I think about. I think, okay, that comment you're making, just in your mind's eye, think of that 15-year-old who doesn't know who they feel like they're not right, they don't fit in the world, they're looking for validation or for comfort or whatever to get through their troublesome teens, because it is hard to get through that. If you think in your mind's eye that's who the audience is ultimately, then you might conduct a debate a little bit more sensitively about, well, how do I get across my legitimate concerns here that isn't going to make anybody else feel somehow that they're not valid or they're not legitimate in their concerns either.
So you've made a very clear pitch, and you've made an empathetic pitch about young people. But what about a lot of the kind of older members of the Labour Party, women, who say that they have been piled on as well? They've had death threats. Sure. They've been threatened with losing their jobs because they say that they don't think they're bad people. They just say, look, we believe in trans, we want to help trans people, but we also believe in biological sex. We believe in single-sex spaces in women's refuges. What's your message to them?
I mean, they're fully entitled to their opinion. My message is that nobody should be threatening anybody in the debate, because you're losing the argument as soon as you start threatening people. It's not helpful. And trans women and people in the women's rights movement more generally do not want a debate about it conducted in that way. Most majority of people will see that as abhorrent, and they don't want that. That is not where they want to be at. What we need to do is conduct ourselves in a way that understands where people are from in the argument, where they're coming from and where their position is. And in the Labour Party, we have people who have different opinions in the broader sense. That's how we make social change and, we evolve within the movement and within society. So it should feel challenging at times to be part of our movement. It should, I've been challenged.
It certainly does.
It should, but it shouldn't feel threatening. Yeah. That's the difference. It should feel challenging in terms of you're provoking my thoughts now and my beliefs. And that should be a way in which we conduct ourselves. I should be able to challenge your views and thoughts that make you think, okay, so
you're saying...
But it shouldn't feel threatening. You shouldn't feel threatened. You shouldn't feel like it's a safe space for you to actually say... In fact, that's the only way we make progress as a movement, is by me being able to say, I'm not quite sure you're right in that. Why do you come from that position on that debate?
So you're saying, look, let's debate this. Let's take this off social media. Let's have these conversations. And final question on this, because I don't want to move on to other things. How would you feel if Rosie Duffield did leave the Labour Party?
I think it would be really upsetting. It was really upsetting when Luciana left the Labour Party, when Ruth did. When our Labour colleagues, and especially women do get it more harder than men in politics. They do. It's a fact. And that's across the political spectrum. You see the misogyny, unfortunately, that is around. That means that women do get it more difficult. So I would feel it would be very, very sad if Rosie felt that because she has a view that there's no place for her in the Labour Party with her view. I think that's damaging, because there's people who would agree with Rosie's view that think that actually the Labour Party's not for me then. Because if she can't have her say, and of course people should be able to have their say within the Labour Party.
Because that's the danger, isn't it? That is the danger. If people see that somebody like Rosie Duffield gets hounded out of the Labour Party, then it makes the Labour Party look like it's gone right back to the days when Jeremy Corbyn was here.
Nobody should be hounded out of the Labour Party. People should be challenged in terms of their views, but in a respectful way. When I say challenge, I mean it in the most mildest of terms. If I don't agree with you on a particular issue, or you think that we shouldn't have nuclear anywhere, even in energy, then that's your viewpoint. I can challenge you on that and say, well, I think that's wrong because of all these reasons. We should be able to do that even on the touchy subjects that emotionally people feel very driven by. We should be able to have that healthy respect of each other to be able to debate that without making someone feel like they're not valid or they cannot voice their opinion in the room. Because if we do that, then we'll never convince the voters or be able to change society for the better. All the advancements that we've done on women's rights and on any other of the rights within this country and the progress we've made socially and economically have been because we've been able to challenge ourselves and have that debate. If we shut down debate, we're not going to make progress. That's the truth. So even if you disagree with somebody, they're entitled to have an opinion, and the best way to change their mind is not by shutting them down and hounding them out, is by having a respectful conversation with them and thinking, why do you think that, and how do I convince you of why I think this is the better way forward? And you're not going to convince them by abusing them and shouting at them.
Okay, that's great. Let's move on to another topic. I mean, you are the most senior woman in the Labour Party. You're the deputy leader of the Labour Party.
The two Angies. I like to think of the two Angies because we've got Angie leading in the Lords, and me and Angie are very close.
Oh, it's true.
So we have the two Angies, as we call them, that flank Keir.
Keir's Angies.
Keir's Angies.
There's a Charlie's Angels kind of thing there somewhere.
Well, Angie's working class from Basildon, so she's the southern working class end, and I'm the northern working class Angie. So.
This is Angela Smith, who is leader of Labour in the House of Lords. And, Angela, what is your experience of being this senior woman in politics, but also a senior woman in the Labour Party? I mean, the Labour Party, is progressive, but it's also quite a macho movement as well, the trade union movement, the whole Labour movement. What is that like, being that top elected woman?
I mean, it has its challenges, but I have a lot of people around me, and I see the sprigs of like the spring of feminism. So whether that's, you've got Sharon Graham, who's now the General Secretary of Unite, you've got my friend who's the General Secretary of Unison now, who's Christina McAnee, and you know, the two biggest unions in the country. You've got Frances O'Grady, who has been doing a tremendous great job as the head of the TUC in the movement. As I say, you've got Angie Smith, who's the head of our Lords team in the House of Lords. So there's loads of strong feminist women. You've got Harriet Harman, who has been absolute ace and has always been supportive of me. And Jack was, bless his little cotton socks. Yeah. Jack, everything that Harriet said about Jack, I could relate to, because he was a member of my team for such a long time, and he was a feminist.
Yeah.
Jack Dromey was a feminist, and I could see why Harriet was able to say those kind words that she said about Jack, because I recognised that in him. But Harriet was there for me as well. So I don't really feel alone. And there's a women's PLP and everyone around. So I feel like even though I'm in this position, I feel like there's a lot of love around, and you've just got to find the people and build the networks that gives you that support. And I think being in politics, a lot of the women understand the challenges they face, and journalists, prominent women journalists as well, have been very supportive of me as well, and have tried to assist, and not in a biased way, but in just a supportive way, to try and say, you know, you're doing great, you know, you've done this great work here, and just bolstering each other up really, and trying to amplify and help each other, and that kind of counterbalances, because there is a very macho feel to politics in the way it is. I mean, we were here till 1:30 in the morning on Monday. And many of us couldn't get home. The taxis wouldn't be here. Whitehall was shut because of a gas leak, and you know, there was a tube strike, so there was no tubes, so no one could get on the tube. So a lot of the women were literally stranded here, and we're trying to wander home and walk home. And it is not a great place. The whole institution of Parliament is not set up to be family friendly. It's set up in an era where men used to disappear, go out and work, and the women stayed at home and looked after the kids. So it is a challenge to try and bring it back up to the 21st century.
I mean, I remember and
I think that challenges the men as well, because the men don't want to make those traditional roles anymore. Many of the men, you know, Carl Turner, MP, who's one of our MPs, Stella is my best mate, his daughter, because Stella's in there all the time, you know. So the men are trying to challenge the mechanisms of Parliament as well, because they don't want to play those traditional roles anymore either. But unfortunately, the institution is still very much stuck in the 19th century.
And as you alluded to, that, you know, women on the front line of politics, you know, face a huge amount of abuse and threats. You yourself have been on the receiving end of very vicious threats. I mean, how has that affected you personally? You
know, the shock for me, and there was some comfort, but also some horror in it for me, is that I thought that when I became deputy leader, that the abuse and the threats that I got was because I'm deputy leader of the Labour Party. It actually transpires that many women, even women who are just MPs without any front bench role, are getting levels of threats that I get. And I find that absolutely astonishing. Because I thought, well, you're putting your head above the parapet, you're out on media a lot, so of course you're going to get that level of exposure. But in all honesty, I can tell you that it's not unique to me. It is not unique to me, and that in itself is quite a worrying factor. It's not because of who I am or because of what I say. Actually, women who have a very low profile in politics get the same level of threats I get. I mean, you look at Rosie Cooper and what happened with Rosie Cooper. She's not, most people who are listening to this now say Rosie Cooper is she? They'll have to Google.
Yeah, I mean,
she's not a high profile MP, and yet she had somebody there was an absolute credible threat of people who wanted to kill her. So it's not unique to me, and that's quite a concern that happens quite frequently. And I hear it from across the other side of the house as well. Many Conservative female MPs get exactly the same. And given that fact, which it is difficult for women in politics, what would your message be to women who are thinking about coming into politics? Because everything we've just talked about, the reality of that, whether it's threats online, whether it's, you know, feeling, you know, threatened as you go around doing your business in your constituency, why would
any woman want to get into politics? Because it is a very tough climate right now.
Because you can change it, and women are. And you work together to do it. So you're in a club of women that have decided that that's their way of progressing the women's movements. It happens in other professions, doctors, surgeons, scientists, mechanics, engineering. Women come together and push through those ceilings, and it's great that that happens. And it's our duty to make that happen. And every woman that comes through gives me a sense of you are doing right, because the next generation are coming in and challenging it. So it makes you feel like even but just by being in the space and occupying it, you're enabling other women to see that there is a place for them to be there. And I hope it encourages them to be there. So whilst we do get a level of threats and there is a level of abuse, I do think also we're making the biggest difference and we're changing things. And some of my colleagues, Stella Creasy is very vocal about the archaic practices here and is pushing ahead. Harriet Harman's been doing that. Yvette's doing a great job in her, Shadow Home Secretary, and when she was on the Home Affairs Select Committee chair, just really advancing and pushing forward. So my message to women that want to get involved in politics is come there. There's lots of women that will support you in doing that. It is a challenge, but it's incredibly rewarding when we make the advancements that we are making.
And speaking of advancements, you are a regular at the dispatch box now for Prime Minister's questions. Yes. When Keir Starmer doesn't have COVID, which seems to be quite a regular occurrence. And so, as you know, I wrote a book about Prime Minister's questions. I used to prepare Ed Miliband for Prime Minister's questions in this very room that we are sat in, having lots of...
How do you think I'm doing?
You're doing brilliantly. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was that, when I go around speaking about Prime Minister's questions, and a lot of the feedback we get about Prime Minister's questions is, particularly from a lot of women, is, we don't like it, it's very aggressive. And most male leaders I interviewed for my book said that they absolutely hated doing Prime Minister's questions. They felt sick about it. You are the absolute opposite to that.
I love it. I love the Punch and Judy of it. I think it is like... it is about banter. It is about getting over your message in a short way. So it's not about being the cleverest person in the room. It's about being able to get your point across in a very short period of time. So I love it, actually. I think I like the theatre of it. I like the setup of it. I think.
Do you like the noise?
I love the noise. I hate the chamber when it's quiet. I mean, I don't know what that says about me, but if you've ever seen me, even when I was Shadow Education Secretary, they were baying for my blood at one point, and I just loved it. I think if I ever went in the chamber and it was quiet, I'd feel like I've not evoked any emotion from anyone. I thrive off... See, that's the thing for me. I thrive off people and emotion. So I actually that's what I was saying before about debate. I like debate. I want to have a debate with somebody and I want them to challenge me. I think the world is a very dull place if we all have the same views and same opinions. And I love getting one up on Boris Johnson at the dispatch box, or when it was Dominic Raab and I told him to get back on his sun lounger. I just love the Punch and Judy of it.
Do you get nervous?
No.
Not at all?
No, not anymore, no. I used to get nervous when I first started at the dispatch box, but now I just think, you know what, you're there to represent your constituents and to represent your party and be the opposition. So for me, it's like an out-of-body experience, if I could put it that way. It's not me. I'm like, when an actor plays a role, for me, I am Her Majesty's official opposition, and I am everybody who feels aggrieved. I am their voice and I channel it all. So I don't actually think it's me. So I take myself out of the equation and just get in the zone, like a boxer gets in the zone for the ring.
Okay, I've got this. So do you have warm-up music?
No, I don't. I have, I just sort of like...
What's your ritual?
My ritual, and again, this scares the hell out of most people because they don't do it this way, but I like to fly by the seat of my pants. So I will not prepare, even for media and stuff, I will not prepare before the morning I'm actually doing it, or before 20 minutes before I'm doing it. So I psych it out of my brain, because otherwise it's in my head, and then I start thinking of all the things that could go wrong. So I shut it out of my head. So I don't prep for PMQs until half an hour before PMQs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I just say, when I worked for Ed, it was like a hostage situation, like 2 days. Like day would turn to night, the seasons would change. Like,
no,
literally.
My team try. My team are like, oh, we really want to go through this with it. And I'm like, nope. It's like, we'll have a general theme of what I'm going or what I want. And then I'm like, no, I will not prepare until it's at half an hour is the maximum prep.
Wow.
I'll do. Because otherwise I think you just, in your mind, you go into all these different places. You overthink things. And I want to be authentic. So I don't come in, it's like I haven't got papers in front of me here. I don't come in with a pre-planned, this is what I'm going to do. A general feel of, yes, I know what we're going to be speaking about. So if there's an important matter that I wanted to bring up, I'll have that in my head. But ultimately, I'm not going to over-prepare, because then that's when you start to sound a bit wooden. I like to be authentic. So at the dispatch box, that's why I can come back on Boris very quickly, because I'm agile. Because I don't feel the weight.
You're not wedded to a script.
Something that we thought, oh, I've not overthought it. You know, I do think about, well, what would he say? What would he come back on? How would I do myself in? How would I smartly, try and sort myself out if I was Boris? I try and think of that. But other than that, I don't over-prepare, because I think you can really psych yourself out sometimes. It's like, I did the world's fastest zip wire, longest zip wire in Wales. And I think if you're thinking about it before you go on it, that's when you totally cack yourself. Whereas if you just don't think about it and then you're there and then you just do it and you're in, then it's like the dentist waiting room is the worst place. The chair is easy. The waiting room is hell.
Now, I'm just conscious of time, but we've got a few other things we want to sort of get through. I mean, you're very outspoken. You get a lot of headlines. Do you think there is a bit of snobbery with how people look at you?
I'm sure there is. But I get a lot of love for who I am as well. So you've got to counterbalance some of that.
And you don't strike me as somebody, you don't seem particularly bothered by...
No. I mean, in all honesty, if I bothered about what people thought of me, then I wouldn't have got out of bed when I was 16 and I was pregnant. The shame that people tried to put on me, the society, the way in which people looked down on me when I was a single mum, when I had no money, when I was on school meals, all of those stigma that was attached to me as a youngster and what I had to put myself through now, I'm like, what, so you think I talk with an accent? Yeah, I do. I talk like my mates. It doesn't bother me. But there again, I don't look, my years as a home help taught me that you shouldn't judge other people either, because when I was younger, I used to judge people who were posh. I judged them, doctors and people, they must be really posh, they must think certain things. And when I became a home help, I looked after people who lived in poverty, and I looked after people who were very affluent. I looked after people who were QCs and who had done amazing things, professors. And you see the human side of people as a home carer. So I have a very different outlook on it now, but I don't let it bother me. I wear my own skin.
Well, you do. And did it bother you when you made those comments about the scum comments at Labour Party conference? I think I actually saw you just before you went off, and there was a big backlash after that. And you did apologise, but did that upset you? And do you think you got that wrong? I mean, you obviously apologised for it.
Yeah, what upset me about that is the way in which it opened up other people to think it was okay to actually go and abuse people. My frustration and what I was trying to achieve was to explain to our movement is that, you've got somebody here who is the Prime Minister of this country who has said some very awful things. And if we fight each other, then we're allowing them to get away with that. It was a call for people to get out the vote and to stop bickering and to take our party forward. It wasn't a call for people to abuse verbally or vandalise MPs' offices and to try and attack our democracy. They're elected. My point was to go out there and get them unelected by speaking to voters and convincing them of who we are. So that was what hurt me, is that I don't want violence, whether that's verbal abuse, physical abuse, or graffiti or vandalisation. I didn't want any of that in my name. And that was important for me.
And is that why you made the apology?
And that was why it was important to me to make the apology, is to recognise that actually sometimes actions, and this is why I was so upset about what Boris Johnson did at the dispatch box around Keir, is he should have known better. And I didn't know that my comments would lead to some people taking arms up against and saying that they were going to threaten and abuse people. And when I recognised that, that's why I took the steps that I did, because I didn't want people to do that, and that was not what I was intending as my comments.
Now, you've just mentioned Keir. I mean, your relationship, you said you met during lockdown, and your relationship has had some ups and it's had some downs. After the Hartlepool by-election, you had quite a fractious time with each other. Where would you say things are now?
Oh, me and Keir, we've always had a reasonably good relationship. You know, it was a bit weird because we came together during lockdown and we hadn't really had a relationship before that. So it was during the COVID period. So it was extraordinary times to try and build and forge a relationship. But it's fair to say that me and Keir are completely different in the way we do things. You know, I could talk about being yin and yang, and we have very different personalities, but that means that we don't own each other's space. He's not trying to be me and I'm not trying to be him. But where the challenge is that the way in which I would, you know, head into a problem or vent my anger about something is different to how Keir would look at it. And therefore, understanding different people and how different people respond to different circumstances, and then bringing yourself together and saying, well, just because we respond differently doesn't mean to say that we don't have the same feelings on the subject. It's about understanding humans and people around you. And me and Keir have got a very good understanding now. I understand Keir and how he responds to things, and he understands me a bit better. So we don't clash anymore in that way. You know, we don't clash on issues. We generally tend to, you know, Keir knows what works for me in the best way and how I respond to stuff, and I know how Keir works and the best way for him. So it kind of makes us bond better.
And I mean, when I worked for...
It's like putting two dogs together in a room. They'll fight for a little bit and then they find a way, and then they become best of mates. So I think we haven't quite got best of mates yet, but we've definitely found a way to exist together and to complement each other. You know, we're just brought together, fused together with two completely different people, and we've managed to find a way to be respectful and understand each other and where we come from.
When I worked for Harriet Harman, when she was deputy leader of the party, you know, a senior woman as well. I mean, one of the things that we did find, and I've spoken about this, and she has spoken about this, put this in her book. She had a platform, but sometimes she didn't feel she had the authority or the respect that she deserved because of the sort of structures of the party and the structures of quite male-dominated power around politics and the Labour Party. Do you ever feel that?
I think uniquely, because I've never really felt like anybody saw me as the solution as I walked into a room, I've always felt like I've had to elbow my way in. Even when I became an MP, I had to elbow my way into the room. When I was a trade union official, I had to elbow my way into the room. So because of where I came from, my class, my background, as well as being a woman, as well as being from the north, all these things kind of put me in a place where it was quite the norm for me to have to fight my way into a room. So I recognise that's still a problem, but I don't think it's unique to my role as deputy leader. I think it's a challenge for us all, especially women in politics, is about finding your space in the room and owning it. And so it felt quite natural to me to go in the room and say, well, I'm going to own and occupy this space and I've got a right to do it, especially in an elected position. So I've been a trade union elected official since I was 20, and I had to elbow my way in a room. I mean, I've literally played that role in Made in Dagenham, where I've been in with the top union guy saying, never mind, you just stay here as a bit of garnish, as a home help, and we'll go and do the negotiating on your behalf. And I've had to go, no, shush, get out of the way, I'm going to do it. So I do understand that, but I've always played that role. And because I'm elected, and I've always been elected to every position I've ever held, it's not about me, it's about pushing my elbows in the room, because I'm there to represent people. They've put their trust in me to voice for them. So actually, I have no problems with occupying a room and saying my voice will be heard, because the reason my voice will be heard is it's not about me. It's about the people that have elected me to make sure that that voice is heard in that room, and that's what I'm going to do.
And, you know, there's no vacancy at the moment for the leader of the Labour Party, and there isn't going to be one for the foreseeable future. But if there was one, would you consider standing? And do you think the Labour Party is ready to have a female leader?
I think the Labour Party's ready, and I'm doing the groundwork now to make sure it's ready by supporting other women and saying you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. And, you know, if I was to answer to you and say, yeah, I'm going to stand for the leader of the Labour Party, I hope that would encourage other women to say, I'm going to stand, not say, oh, well, Angie's standing, so I can't. The women's movement for me is about occupying space, but also encouraging others to occupy that space as well. So I think that the Labour Party will have a female leader, whoever that will be. I'm not bothered as long as we get there. And I think my job is to be part of that movement that makes that happen. And I think it will happen. So for you,
the next leader has got to be a woman?
I think we're ready for it, and I'd certainly be pushing for it. But at the moment, I'm happy with Keir because I get to be the woman in charge. So Keir might be the leader, but I get to be the woman in charge.